Prediction 9, the metamorphosis of the traditional doctor. What's interesting, and if I think about my career and the trajectory, how things changed, I went from writing in a note. In fact, my charts didn't even have clips. We just stuck sheets of paper, and that's how old I am, to the EHR and documenting.
We had to check, we had the, by the way, the punch thing, the T sheet that you just punched. You didn't even write, you just punched the little hole in the thing that checked it off.
Interesting. And then we morphed into the EHR, and they were never designed with the patient in mind. And I have a lot of bad jokes if you hang out with me, but one of them was that I wanted to put a big bus mirror up in front of me so I could type and look at, can you show me your rash? So I didn't have to turn around because we were so pressed for time. So the idea for me is that when I think about the interaction with the patient, I know that about 30% of the education and the advice is going to be embraced by the patients. That's not a lot. So I'm going to give some great advice in 30% of that. So if I have a 15-minute session and I have to type and manipulate and be in the chart and not engage the patient and have the experiences, then I have this much time to share, knowing that 30% of that is going to be shared. So when I think about the evolution of AI and to provide a relationship, and I use quality touches, that now I have almost the full 15 minutes or 30 minutes of that session to kind of be one-on-one, eye contact, embrace, feel, become empathic about what we need to do together. So that's what really gets me charged and excited.
I think about, physicians coming full circle. Like back in the day, before the internet, physicians and care providers, all kinds of, we've been saying physician, but of course we're talking about all kinds of, care providers, would be with the patient, would sit with the patient. They understood the power of empathy. They understood the treatment effect of, a patient believing in their care provider, believing that something is going to help you has a huge impact on whether it actually helps you or not. Huge impact. They've known that for, that's been for centuries and centuries. And then, the last few decades, we've kind of gotten away from that. Like you said, you got pulled away because you were looking, you were looking at the screen, and you knew you had 6 minutes with the patient. Right. And so we kind of got pulled away from all of that. And I think the great potential for AI is to help us come back to now we can get back to that humanity component, the empathy component, that we can really have that and have all the other stuff running in the background. All of the analytics, the prediction, the stuff that will help us empower the patient, the data, all of that AI can provide way better than we can provide, because we of course have fatigue. AI doesn't have fatigue, and we have bias. And like it or not, we have all kinds of different biases. And I'm not just saying, biases against, certain types of people. Like we have biases based on things that we've seen recently. Types of diseases or conditions we've seen most recently. That influences what we think and the way we treat patients. AI doesn't have any of that. So it can do all kinds of things that we cannot do. But we can get back to what we can do really well that AI can't do. So really coming full circle.
Yeah, I think you guys have really hit on something, which is, during the classic physician visit, the amount of time you're one-on-one, touching the person, looking in them eye, in general you want to maximize it. And we spent a lot of time at Presbyterian trying to figure out, okay, how do we improve the happiness of our providers and their net efficiency? And as we began to look at it, it was very interesting to see when you interviewed them, there were two things that often overwhelmed them. And one was the expansion of the medical information in general. So I looked up a couple of numbers. It was interesting. Healthcare information doubled 50 years ago. So in 1950, it doubled. That number from 50 years of doubling went to 3.5 by 2010. And it's now less than 100 days. So there are 3,000 PubMed articles issued every day. So you think about that, there's no capacity for any person to stay current. There's no capacity. Then the second thing, and I'm very cognizant of this, is, you know, as you have patients come in, I'm sure you've seen this, they've been in the hospital and they come back and there's a 90-page PDF. Yep. And that's where you're scrolling through it. You're not interacting with the patient. You're trying to figure it out. And then if you ask the patient, they're terrible historians. So now you're operating blind, in part, because of the limitation of time. You're actually not communicating with the individual. So I always look at this, you know, the title is, what's the trajectory of the traditional physician? And I think of the traditional physician having been educated in medical school and having this incredible repository of facts that they applied over their career. And that image is gone. And I think of the evolving doctor is this just extraordinarily agile digital athlete that understands the tools to integrate the existing information on that patient, has the tools at their disposal that say, this medication is ideal, it was approved this morning. And also that ability to know if they can afford it. Don't give them a prescription they can't afford. So I really think it's such a fascinating transition to say, what you're now asking that individual to do is be an elite digital information integrator on one hand, and be an extraordinary empathetic communicator on the other to encourage and inform the patient to do what they can do best. That's a tough challenge. Yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting challenge to create that person that does that efficiently, effectively, and doesn't come through like they're just trying to process you.
I love that idea of physicians as elite digital athletes. And it takes a ton of training for them to learn how to do that. I remember, you know, the first day of medical school decades ago, they said, of course, they said this to all of us, that first day they said, half of what you're going to learn here is going to be, by the time you get done, it's going to be obsolete. Problem is we just can't tell you which half. And now I think it's more like 80% of what we're training you and teaching you right now is going to be, in just a short period of time, going to either be obsolete or shown to maybe even be wrong. We just can't tell you which 80%. But I like that idea that, you know, young healthcare providers need to be intentionally trained in how to harness AI, how to utilize it. And I think there is still some, you know, a little bit of combativeness, you know, just because it's so new and people, it's easy to want to push it back as opposed to embrace it and figure out how to really harness the potential of it.
So my brother-in-law is a family practice physician, and when I see him or we go somewhere, he's always asking me, okay, tell me about the latest AI tools you're using. What are you using here? What are you using here? How are you doing this? Right. And what I find is if you're in that world of trying to stay fluent with those, the rate at which they're changing is yet again a problem to keep up with. So now you have the tools are changing to do it. You have the information content is changing. It's a real challenge, and I think it leads to the burnout of physicians. And then the other thing, and you mentioned this, is, my goodness, we've got to get them out of doing these rote activities like prescription refill. I mean, that's an activity that can be automated. There are questions, maybe you need to do lab results, but we had 45 minutes a day with what a primary care physician was spending on physician refills at Presbyterian. That is a waste of cognitive energy, effort, and time. We've got to get those out of the system.
Right. It's interesting that we have to think that empathy is the evergreen. Like that's the forever part of medicine, despite all the technology. And what we try to teach the team members who come on board with us is that I want you to bookend empathy. I want you to think about the first minute of your session, that you just let a patient speak, you don't interrupt, you give them eye contact, you embrace what they're saying, because I want you to create that connection. Then you can document, you do whatever you need to do, you look at your data. whether you did beforehand or not. And then at the end, the same thing. Let's give empathy. Let's share advice. Let's share a plan together so that if we can bookend empathy on the front and the back end, then we've created the efficiency of the story, because the story is all about not just what's written in the note, but what's felt in the way we empower that session and that visit. So that becomes so important. So we can't lose track of the real power of the empathy with technology. Yeah.
The other one I think is then because many times patients are frazzled enough, they do not hear a lot of what you say. It's the ability then to take that information that you provided, and I'm assuming, an empathetic doctor is using terminology and references that are resonating because they're getting that feedback, and then be able to reinforce that. Because the note you would write to them, which doesn't really occur, or the follow-up, it's all kind of standardized, the terminology and the structure would be very different than the conversation. If you could reinforce the conversation, it'd have more impact.
Right.
I think this is one of the themes that we keep touching on, is that there's things that AI can do that we cannot do well or cannot do at all. Things about enormous amounts of processing data, scouring, data, papers, updating information that we just cannot stay updated on, finding trends and things that we just can't. There's too much computational, necessity that we're not able to do it. But there's things that we do that AI, in my opinion, will not be able to do, certainly not be able to do well. And empathy, one of them, but the other two I think about is judgment. Judgment, empathy, and then the third one is presence. Empathy is not going to be there with somebody and really provide that reassurance, which is really what patients, in lots of cases actually need.
Right.
So empathy for sure, but judgment, empathy, and presence are some of the things that we can do, that we have to focus on, and maybe AI finally helps us get back to that.
Right, that's great, because the way you describe that really creates the envelope of care. That kind of helps wrap, all the needs of what that patient's looking for. So that's great.
AI will never create physical touch. Can't.